Well, happy anniversary to all of you this morning. Good to have you here this morning. Before I get started, there's a special guest that I want to introduce this morning. I don't typically recognize new people when they come to church, but this guy I'm going to. Rick Grace, would you stand up, please? Rick Grace is our guy at DHF now. Remember when Doug Harvey used to come quite a bit? And Rick Grace is the guy just started, last year? In September with DHF. So Rick came out a month or so ago and met with me, and so we look forward to working with Rick. If you don't know about DHF is Disciple Heritage Fellowship. It's a group that we kind of belong to. It's a bunch of independent churches where we can get together and we can bounce ideas off of each other. If we need support for something, they're there for that. They have a conference coming up in April that we're going to be going to. And so thank you, Rick, for coming. We're glad to have you. I want to begin with a verse from Psalms. Psalm 105, verse 4 and 5 says, "Look to the Lord in his strength, seek his face always, remember the wonders he has done." Today is going to be about remembering as we celebrate our 15th anniversary. And we want to look back maybe at a few things and look forward to the future and maybe remember some things that God has done. And I really want us to focus on what God has done. It's not about me. It's not. Goldie and I were talking about this morning. We're like, this has happened in spite of us and not because of us. And it's just awesome to be in God's will and just following God's lead. And some things I'm going to share with you today that we can see how God has just led every step of the way. So as I was thinking about this, the question people ask me sometimes is why? Why start another church 15 years ago? What was it that inspired us to do that? And I have to tell you that was never on my radar. It wasn't something that I grew up thinking, someday I'm going to grow up and I'm going to start a church. That wasn't in my idea. In fact, God worked on me for a long time before I ever conceded and decided to do it. Just a couple things. One thing that just really stood out to me recently as I thought back is I remember the first 40 years of my life going to churches, going to more traditional churches. There was two of them, one I grew up with and then, I don't know, in the mid-'90s sometime we went to another church and very traditional, strict churches. But in those first 40 years of my life, I don't remember one baptism of an adult. All the baptisms were baptisms of teenagers, people that grew up in the church. Church growth was by having babies. You know what I mean? It wasn't really by bringing other people in. And, but Jesus tells us to go out and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So I asked myself, why? Why? And as I looked at our church and I realized there were certain roadblocks to outsiders coming into the church. There were certain traditions, the way we dressed, our style of service, and so forth. The teaching was great in the churches we went to. The Word of God was taught every Sunday. The people were good, great people. But I noticed that the methods were stuck in the 1950s. In business, I learned this phrase: methods are many, principles are few. Methods may change, but principles never do. That can be applied to business. It can be applied to the church as well, I think. And that's something that we've tried to do here. Even the Apostle Paul said it in a similar way. He said, "To the Jews I became like a Jew to win the Jews. To those under the law I became like one under the law, though I myself am not under the law, so as to win those under the law. To those not having the law, I became like one not having the law, though I am not free from God's law, but am under Christ's law, so as to win those not having the law. To the weak, I became weak to win the weak. I have become all things to all people, so that all possible means I might save some. I do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessing." So basically what Paul was saying is, methods may change, but principles never do. So let me just give you an example. I was actually an assistant pastor, and I'd been to a church conference and met this group of singers. It was a gospel quartet, a Southern gospel quartet. And so I invited them to church and got it approved with everybody. Sure, let's have them come in. So we promoted this, and we had a full house that evening. We had lots of people came to hear these singers, the Southern Gospel Quartet. And as they started singing, they did like we often do. You know, they encouraged people to start clapping. There was an old guy in the front row and said, "We don't do that here." Just to give you an idea of where we came from, all right? And so I noticed some things that I thought maybe we should change, because here's what I noticed. I was about in my 40s at the time, low 40s, and I noticed there were a whole lot of couples there that were in their 50s, 60s, and 70s who had lots of kids, but not one of their kids was in church. And I said, something has to change here, or this church is going to die. And so I went to the other leaders of the church and talked about it. I said, what can we need to change some methods. And so I said, sure, that's a great idea. So we did that. We changed the music, which I had been a song leader for 20 years, all right? You know, we sang the a cappella songs. And so I said, maybe we need to change our style a little bit, because, we'd been doing that church had been doing that for 100 years, okay? So we started a praise team and a few other changes. But we noticed that there was always this resistance. And so that's when we decided, rather than, rocking the boat, we just step aside and started something new, something different. And, and I think looking back, at the time we were like, I don't know if this is going to work out. But looking back, I think it's worked out pretty well. Last week we baptized the whole family, and that's awesome to do that. Over 100 people have been baptized here, most of them adults from 6 years old to 85 years old, and that's awesome. This morning I want to bring up a few people who were there at the beginning, and we'll start this morning with Viola Jess. Is Viola Jess here? Come on up, Viola. And Viola was there. Now, this lady, she was there with us from the beginning. She's an awesome lady. She raised 7 kids by herself. Several of them are here this morning. And bless you, Lola.
Good morning, everyone. What else is left to say after the songs and what Kenny shared? The songs were awesome. They just went right along with the way I've felt about being at Solid Rock Chapel. And I come out of the same culture as Kenny, a lot of legalism and traditions and following all those things. And when Kenny asked me to share what Solid Rock Chapel has meant to me, it's like, whew, where do I start? But the word faithfulness kept coming to me. And God has just been so faithful. I look out here. When we started, what was it, 30 people maybe at the most? 22? Now look at this. Isn't God faithful? It's amazing. And I think for me, it has just helped me to build my faith more on God, and just Kenny preaching the Word of God and the praise songs. We get lifted up through that. Our spirits get lifted. And we have this body of people. We get together. We love each other. We share. And, we have fun. And God is just amazing. He has done so many great things through the people here at the church. And I think we get equipped here on Sundays to go out and spread God's love and be his hands and feet as we go throughout the week, as we encounter other people. We're all just people. We have problems, we have issues, people are hurting, but God is faithful. And his goodness, it's just forever, just like the song we sang. I mean, his goodness, it's just forever, you know. He never changes. He's always there for us. And for the 15 years through the journey here, it has been amazing. And I know God's going to do great and mighty things because his word is true and he does what he says. And my word for this year kind of came to me was Jubilee. I think 2020 is going to be a year of Jubilee. I don't know what that encounters, but I know God is good. So praise to God for all this goodness he's done through all these years.
Thank you, Lola. Lola has a son-in-law, Jay, who was there at the beginning. Jay was instrumental in when we got started. In fact, Jay and I had gone to a conference in Nashville about planting a church, about how to start a church. And he served as an elder for many years. And so I've asked Jay to share a few words.
All right. Had a few points to make. Kenny covered a bunch of things because we came out of that same church. And my mother-in-law, she obviously shared a little bit of that. I'm married to her oldest daughter. So it's the only mother-in-law I've ever known. So she's the best. That's a good thing. Couple things that came to my mind when Kenny asked me to share was there was a small group that we met in Kenny's basement, I think, talk about this. You know, hey, what are we going to do? Not everybody that was there came to the church. And, some of them are still at that church. I think they're great people. But one thing that we talked about when we started, and I don't know whose idea of just a consensus or what, or God prompted us, but because the church we came from, I felt like was very inward focused. But we talked about tithing when we came here. And that's one thing that's always stood out to me. Whatever gets given to the church, we need to tithe on that money for whatever purpose, local missions, international. And I think that's one thing that has helped us to keep the focus off ourselves and focus on other people. So that's always been a big one for me. And had a couple things here. Our kids were, most of you probably only know we have one child. She's 13. We have a 23-year-old that's married and a 21-year-old son. And they both live in Champaign. We started coming here, they were 6 and 8 years old. So it was kind of tough because they were the only kids. Megan was, but she was a little bit older than they were. Weren't any other, they didn't have any friends here. Their friends all went to the school that, the friends they had at school went to some other churches. So that's kind of where they ended up at. After they turned or got a little older, they went to the other church, which a lot of times what happens. Your kids, they make friends, and that's where you go to church, where you do things. So that's kind of what happened to us. So regrets, no, but that was just kind of the time we were in, I guess, for us. One thing I'm very thankful for is all the people here. Made a lot of good friends. And sharing the duties it takes to run a church. Because when we started, we did it all. Weren't very many people to take all that on, so we did it. But look what it's turned into. God's good on that. So, new friends, new business opportunities. I was at a job for 18 years. 5 years ago, we bought a business off of a fellow church member. That's been a great opportunity for us, and it's been good. So, new things come. New friends, church people, God knows what you need before you know it. So, one thing I'm very thankful for is, Kenny and Goldie's faithfulness over the years. He stepped out. We followed along, I should say. We helped, but I wouldn't have done it on my own or with God, even with God's help. I wasn't going to do it. But, we were able to tag along, I guess I should say. And, they've had some health challenges. Goldie did a few years back, and through that time, they remained faithful. That's the times when people can give up a lot of times, and they didn't. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Now I want to share a little bit about just about God's faithfulness. Starting out, we're like, what should we name our church? How do you come up with a name for a church? And so I think if I remember correctly, we'd kind of put out some ballots for people to write down a name that they, and that was right when we started. We had 20-some people, right? And so we went through and we talked about different things, and we came up with Solid Rock Chapel. And the reason for that is because I wanted us to focus on the rock, okay? Jesus Christ. There's a verse in Psalm says, "For who is God besides the Lord, and who is the rock except our God?" Now, it's interesting, of course, when you start out on something, there's always the haters, right? There's always people that come out and will say things. So one person said, well, that church shouldn't be called Solid Rock. It should be called Loose Gravel. Well, at the time, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade, right? At the time, we had this sign out here that you could put the letters on, and you could put a sign on there, and every week we'd put something on that sign. And so I put on the sign, if you find yourself on loose gravel, come to Solid Rock. So we started out, and I was actually on the board of the Arthur Nursing Home at the time. And the Arthur Nursing Home owned this little building that's now a church there on the edge of Arthur, across from the park, Living Word Fellowship now. But at that time, the building was sitting empty. And so we had no place to go. We had nothing, no place to meet. We had no money. We had nothing. We just had this leap of faith that we're going to start a church. Crazy idea. So I went to the president of the board and I said, we got this building over here. Would you rent that to us so we can, have our church in there at least temporarily until we find something? And the guy says, no, I won't rent it to you, but you can use it. And so we did. We moved in and we used it, and it was great for a period of time. But I always wanted to be in Sullivan. We live in Sullivan. We know people in Sullivan, and I really wanted to be in Sullivan. So had no idea how that was going to happen. So one Sunday afternoon, I'm laying on the couch taking a nap, and my phone rings. And it's a pastor who was kind of the interim pastor at this church. This church didn't have a full-time pastor anymore, and this pastor called me and says, hey, I got an idea. He says, this church that I'm helping out down here in Sullivan is really dying. There was about 20 people here. The youngest person was 65. He says, really dying. He said, why don't you come and maybe we can join forces. Maybe we can work something out, and we can build something together here. So we came down and met with him and talked to him and said, okay, fine. He said, sure, we'll try, come. I said, well, we'll come down and we'll do a service like we do a service, which is pretty different from what they were doing. And because we pretty much felt that God had called us in this particular direction, and we weren't going to change, okay? Said, we'll do the service like we do the service. So we did. We came down. We did a service for them. And they're like, it was all right, but it's really not our style. And they said, tell you what, we'll just rent you the building. And so they rented us the building for, I think it was $500 a month, which was pretty awesome. And they went and joined a Church of God on the other side of town. It's amazing how God works. Sometimes he tests you and tests your patience, see what you're really made of. So we're here for a couple years, and at that point it's probably about a year and a half. And the church over there was trying to decide what they were going to do, if they were going to sell this building or sell that building or whatever. And so we knew there was a meeting coming up about that. And so we prayed about it. And we had assigned people to fast and pray every day for a period of time. And I remember getting up and telling the church that, y'all, let's just pray, from one church to another, let's pray that they just give us this building. We didn't have a lot of money at that point. And so we did. We prayed. They had their meeting. The next day, one of the guys calls me and says, hey, I need to talk to you. So I went down and met with him. And he said, well, we had our meeting last night. And somebody at that meeting got up and gave the proposal that we just give you the building. But the rest of the property, you pay market value for the property, but the building itself, you can have it for $1. I said, wow, God answered prayer. We should have prayed that he'd give us the whole property, not just the building. Be more specific next time. All right? So that's awesome. So we kind of figured the rest of the property, which the house was included over here at that time, was worth about $150,000. So we said, all right, we'll give you $150,000 for the property. And thought we had a deal. Well, funny how human nature works, but there were some people that decided that, nah, that's not good enough. We're not going to. In fact, they had voted on it and approved it. I won't go into all that, but it caused a big problem in that church. But some of them said, no, we're not going to do that. We think it's worth a lot more than that. They had it appraised. It was worth $400,000. And they said, we need $400,000 for the property. We said, no, we're not going to do that. Said, God, I think God answered our prayer, and that's what we're going to do. So time went on, and they came back 3 different times and said, we got to have more money. I said, no, we're not going to do that. And finally they came back and said, hey, in fact, they put a big for sale sign out in the yard. 4x8 sheet of plywood for sale. Try to have a church with a for sale sign in the front yard. It's interesting. So we didn't know what we were going to do, but we were trying to be faithful to what God had showed us. And so they came to me one day and said, we've got a buyer for that building, and they're going to have to move out. So I'm like, okay, God, I guess we weren't supposed to have it after all. And what do we do now? So I had a friend who was on the board of the little theater. And I was talking to him one day about this, and he said, hey, we don't use the theater on Sunday morning. Just come to the theater. Sure, no problem. So we did that. We bought a trailer, and we put all our sound equipment in the trailer. And every Sunday morning or Saturday night, if they didn't have a show on Saturday night, we'd go in and set up. If they had a show on Saturday night, we'd go in and set up on Sunday morning. And it was great because right next door was a restaurant where we'd have coffee afterwards. And it was a good experience. Just we're learning to work together and going in. But man, we got tired of that quick. And we did that for about 6 months. And then it seemed like God kept pulling the rug out from under us because the city or the county, I don't know if it's county or what, but the tax, because of they're tax exempt, the church is tax exempt too, but because of change of use of the building, they were going to have to reapply for their tax exemption or pay taxes, which was like $50,000. And they didn't want to go through all that. And so I'm not kidding you, I was in a conference in Chicago, a pastor's conference. And I get a call from the president of the little theater. And he said, this is your last Sunday at the theater. You can't be there anymore. And I absolutely did not know where we were going to be the following Sunday. But before I got home, a representative from the other church called and said, hey, we'll take your offer of $150,000 and you can move back in. Isn't that how God works? It's like, wow. Amazing how God works. Sometimes, I've learned that God is never early, but he's never late. And sometimes he really tests our faith. So we're back in the church. We're getting established. And it's amazing how God works. And I've shared this story before, but I remember one Sunday morning, this little girl made a phone call to her aunt and said, would you come to church with me today? It was little Audrey. She's sitting over here. She's all grown up now. And because of that phone call, her aunt and her husband came, and then they started inviting people. And pretty soon, because of that phone call, there was this other couple that came. Don and Robin Higgins. Don and Robin have been with us from, I think, 2007 or 2008, somewhere in there. And Don's an amazing guy. I don't know if he'll get Robin up here to talk this morning or not. But Don travels the country talking to deer hunters, sharing his testimony. And so I've asked them to come and just share a little bit this morning.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. We've got a pretty unique story, but I've got to start with last week and how we got up here today. Last week, Pastor Kenny told us that there was going to be some people come up and speak this week. And, like any good husband, I tease my wife at every opportunity. So as we was leaving church last Sunday, working our way towards the back, I told Robin, I said, I'm going to tell Pastor Kenny that you want to talk next week. She gave me one of them looks, you better not. And so I'm telling you, we hadn't walked 50 feet. We went through the back doors there, and Pastor Kenny's waiting on us. And he says, Dawn, you want to talk next week? She starts laughing. I said, only if she comes up there with me. So that's how we got up here today. But our story of how we ended up at Solid Rock is pretty unique. When Rob and I were first married, we went to a church in Shelbyville and attended real regular. And then a few years into that, an incident happened to that church that kind of soured us up on the whole deal. And we actually quit going to church. And we hadn't been to church in probably close to 10 years. I mean, we never even went on Easter or Christmas. We still believed, in God and everything, still had our faith. But we were so burned over that incident that happened that we were just, kind of soured up on the whole church deal. And, then one night, I guess I should give you a little background information on me personally to kind of help you understand where I'm going next. But, I'm kind of into the end times prophecy. My two favorite books in the Bible are Daniel and Revelation, because they talk about end time prophecy. And I'm really into that. So, shortly after 9/11, I'd made up my mind that Muslims were pretty much of Satan. And that was my opinion before I ever showed up here at Solid Rock. And then, so with that in mind, Robin and I are in this period of we're not even going to church. And one November evening, we're sitting on the couch back in 2008. And we're sitting on the couch watching TV, and I just couldn't believe what I was seeing on TV. It was election night, and Barack Obama had just been elected president. And, I knew he was a Muslim, and I just couldn't believe that just a few years after 9/11, this country had elected a Muslim for president. And I can still remember looking at Robin that night and saying, we got to get back in church. We got to find us a church because, this just lines up with the Bible. We're seeing Scripture fulfilled right before our eyes. And so we ended up at Solid Rock. I'm going to let Robin tell you that story of how we ended up here. And then I've got a few more comments to make after that.
Well, I was raised in church. I guess you could say I had a drug problem because I was drugged to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, and everything else. So I was church faithful until I graduated from high school, and then I moved out. And I moved out, lived my life, got married, we had children, and but I always knew in my heart something was missing. God was faithful. He just kept knocking at my heart's door, and I just didn't follow it. I wanted to live my life the way I wanted to live it. And, of course, my mother was constantly, you need to get back in church, you need to get back in church. And I'd be like, yeah, I'll get there. Well, I'll keep going back to Proverbs 22:6. Train up a child in the way they shall go, and they will, in their old age, will not depart from it. And that's me. So, Don and I are contemplating, we're talking about, we really need to get back in church. What are we going to do? We need to find a church, and I don't want to go back to my home church, which is the church that we were going to. We loved our pastor there. He was the one that married us, and long story short, our church did him wrong, and we just couldn't accept that Christians would treat their pastor the way they did. So that's why we decided not to go back there. Well, I'm going to take you to one evening in 2008. We were out having dinner with friends, And they're the friends that Kenny was speaking of that invited us. And they kept going on and on and on about a small group. And I'm like, okay, finally, I'm like, what is a small group? Because we didn't have that from the church that I came from. I came from a similar, maybe not a similar, but somewhat similar church. It was a very strict church, no makeup, no jewelry. When we had prayer time, men were on one side, women were on the other, no touching of, any of that business. And so they say, well, small group is a bunch of our church people that get together and we read the Bible, we fellowship, we have a great time. Why don't you guys come? So after we had dinner with them and we talked about it, and we're like, well, what do you want to do? So finally on Easter Sunday of 2009 was our first time here. And for me, I grew up in a church with hymnal singing and no men, women touching if you weren't married. So I come in and we have the music that you guys are having. And I believe Pastor Kenny hugged me and I was shocked. Because in my church, men don't touch women unless they're married to them. So I was like, ooh, that took a little getting used to for me, for other, So we started coming and we absolutely love this church. I mean, we love our pastor and his wife, and I don't know what we would do without Solid Rock. You all are wonderful. Anytime we have an issue, you come alongside. We had health issues with our youngest daughter. She is finally healthy and gaining weight, so that's a praise. And we just want to thank you all for all that you do. This is such an awesome church. You give above and beyond outside of this church for Nicaragua, for the Beacon. It's just awesome what you do.
So actually, Pastor Kenny asked me to speak 5 years ago at the 10th anniversary. And I think he just likes to hear me talk about Obama, but I'm not sure. But anyway, there's another chapter to our story between that 10th anniversary and today on the 15th I think is worth sharing. You guys have probably all heard the saying that God can take your mess and turn it into a message. But you can turn that around. Satan can take your message and turn it into a mess. And he came into our lives and did that. And what happened was there was a handful of us here at Solid Rock that got our panties in a bind, if you will, over a little situation. And we decided we're leaving. We're taking off. We're going to find a new church. And that's what happened. So this small group of us, we went to this other church. And about 2 months in, Robin and I decided this church is not for us. We're got to find something else. So for the next few months, Robin and I are hopping from church to church. I think we ended up going to 9 different churches. Some of them we was there once. Others, if we thought there was a possibility, we'd go multiple weeks, and then we'd eventually move on. And there was things we was looking for. We wanted a non-denominational church, one that preached right from the Bible, didn't add to it, didn't take from it. So we was kind of limited. We wasn't just going to go to any church. But we kind of got burned out looking for church. We just quit going again. And so there was a couple months there we were not going to church whatsoever. And then I get a call from a good friend of mine. Those of you who go to the Beacon Christmas party know Santa shows up every year. Well, Santa's a good friend of mine. And I actually kind of made that introduction to bring Santa to that party every year. And Santa calls me one day towards Christmas, and he says, hey, I got an invitation to go to that Beacon party again this year. And he says, but I know you don't go to church there anymore. He says, I don't want to go without your blessing. And I told him, I said, you absolutely need to go. That's a great thing. You need to go and do your thing. And so he said he would, and he got with Sharon, and went that year. But right before that Beacon party, someone from the church here reached out to us and invited us to come. And, we wanted to go in a bad way because I just enjoy watching Santa interact with those folks. And we wanted to go in a bad way, but, we just left this church a few months earlier, and we didn't exactly leave on really good terms, because when I left, I kind of cleared the air with Pastor Kenny on a whole list of issues. And I mean, so you folks, well, I'll get to this part in a little bit. So anyway, we went to the Beacon party, and the people at Solid Rock were fantastic. They treated us like we had never left. And not only that, but in that few months that we was gone, anytime we ran into any of you folks out, we were treated like we'd never left. And we were still treated like church family. And that meant a lot to us. So we go to that Beacon party, and on the way home that night, Robin says to me, she's breaking down. She said, I want to go back to Solid Rock. And I'm like, yeah, me too. But, on the way out the door, I kind of kicked Pastor Kenny in the shins and gave him a headbutt. So I couldn't just show up, and have Pastor Kenny walk around the corner one night, and there we're out in the audience. Hey, remember us? So I called Pastor Kenny and asked him if he'd meet me for lunch one day, and he said sure, and did. And I apologized for the things that I'd said and how it all went down. And I asked him if he would be fine with us coming back to church, and he said absolutely. And I'm kind of reminded of the scripture, where the shepherd leaves the 99 to go to the one, and we was the lost one, I'm telling you. And Pastor Kenny welcomed us right back in. But then we had to come back to church. So I'm telling you, we all know what it's like to go to a church for the first time, how uncomfortable it is. Well, just imagine going back to a church where you just left a few months earlier and you kicked the pastor on the way out the door. That's a lot harder, a lot more uncomfortable. But, we come back in, and it's almost like the parable of the son that goes out and he asks for his inheritance early, and then squanders it and comes back home, and his father accepts him in, but his brother didn't. And so we're coming in. There's a lot of people here that we hadn't seen in all those months that we were gone. So at least I knew the father was going to accept me back. Pastor Kenny was on board, but I wasn't sure about everybody else. Everybody I'd run into had been great to us, so I assumed everybody else would. But, it was pretty hard coming back through that church door for the first time. But you folks have been great. We just consider you all a blessing. We're blessed to be a part of this church family. And we don't look to be leaving anytime soon. So thank you.
I wanted to add that
Thanks, Don. It's true, he can kick pretty hard. But sometimes I need it. All right, sometimes I need it. Oh, where was I? Wow. Sometimes as we look back, we can see the thin threads of God's plan. Early on, like Jay shared, we just had a few kids, and soon it started to grow a little bit. We had a few more kids, and the person who was leading the kids at the time wanted some kind of a mission project for the kids, something that they could sink their teeth in. And so she went online and she went to the Compassion website and sponsored this child named Angel, who was from Nicaragua. Little did we know what God had in store for us through that child. I think he was 5 or 6 years old at the time. And so it just so happened that the following year, in 2008, our daughter Kendra signed up for a mission trip to go to Nicaragua with some friends of ours from Texas. And she goes to Nicaragua, and their deal is going to Nicaragua was to go out and to visit some compassion projects and share a little program, give away some Bibles and some things like that. And so as they're on this trip, Kendra asked, can we go visit Angel? And so they looked up where he was, and they discovered that he was close by. He was actually at a church that they had never been to before. And so they decided to go over and to visit Angel. And when they got there, they discovered the worst conditions they had ever seen. The houses of this neighborhood were scraps of metal and plastic that the people had salvaged from a nearby garbage dump. The church was basically a lot with a tree, and that's where they had their church and their school. And so Kendra came back and she says, can we do something? Well, it had kind of been rolling around in my head as well that, we need an outreach for our church. We need something that our church can sink our teeth into, and a mission outreach outside of our church, even outside of the country. And so I called my friend Galen and I said, what can we do? And Galen and I booked some tickets to go to Nicaragua to investigate. I'd asked for anyone to go with me, and at the last minute, Menno volunteered. And Menno has been doing that for the last 12 years now, going to Nicaragua. In fact, he's there right now. And because of that thin thread, that little boy, Angel, who's now, a teenager. In fact, I bought a gift for him the other day. He wants to be a mechanic, so I bought some tools for him that I'm sending down with the team this year. And so we've followed that, and we've gone back year after year. And I met Pastor Dennis Sanchez down there. Now, the interesting thing, and I didn't really realize this until we were a couple years into it, but when we came and we started some building projects, we brought some money down, we bought some material. This is Dennis right here. And we started doing some things down there. These people were skeptical of us. Because what happens so many times on the mission field is a church comes in, they do something, they leave, and you never see them again. Well, we came back the next year, and the next year, and the next year for 12 years. A couple years in, Dennis one day breaks down crying to me. He says, you know what? He said, I've been praying for 6 years for someone to come and help us. And it's been awesome to be able to be in God's plan for that. Today, over 1,000 kids go to the schools that we've built in Nicaragua. Our philosophy is to supply the funds, and they build the buildings mostly with volunteer labor. And we've been doing that for 12 years. We've built relationships. In fact, in a few weeks, we've got a team going down again, and there's a couple down there who planned their wedding so they could have it while our team is there. In fact, I believe Kevin has a part in that wedding. And so that's awesome. And I think God has blessed us tremendously because of that. So as time has gone on, I want to bring up a couple that hasn't been here as long as some of us. They've been here for, 5 years maybe, 5, 6 years maybe, I'm not sure. Steve and Narda, come on up. Steve and Narda come from, and you'll recognize this when you hear Steve talk. He's not from around here. Right? Love this couple and love to hear what they have to say.
Thank you, Pastor. Well, I'm going to share how the Lord brought us to Solid Rock, and he truly did bring us to Solid Rock. So our youngest daughter and her family lived down in rural Lovington. So when it was time for us to retire, we decided, well, it's cheaper that we can't live in the Chicagoland area. It's too expensive. So we said, we like it down there. We'll move down there. So in June of 2015, I retired and we moved down to Lovington. So we started attending the church that they were attending. So we were there about a month, and then we decided, this isn't for us. This isn't where the Lord wants us. Well, we hadn't been invited by a friend, a new friend that we met, to go to their church. So we went to their church, and we visited a couple times. And that wasn't it. So then we started looking online, looking for a church. And we came from a Bible church background. Because once we left Catholicism, we wanted a church that taught the Word of God and no other stuff, just the Bible, like Don was saying. So we've been in Bible churches for over 43 years. So we started visiting other churches. And we went to 2 other churches, went a couple times. No, this isn't it. Went a couple times to the other. Nope. So we're praying, God, where do you want us? Because we got to get plugged in. It's like September now, or the end of September. So you know how that light goes on in your head sometimes? It goes, bing. And I go, hey, remember when we moved down here, we had to find a bank. And this was before we had smartphones and GPS. We didn't have it. So we locked in and we decided, well, we're going to go to the Scott State Bank. So the first week we were here, we go to the bank. We're looking for the bank, and we flew right by the bank. Didn't even see it. So we're driving down the road, and I'm going, wow, we're almost out of town. I said, we must have missed the bank. So as soon as I say that, I look up to the right, and here's this big parking lot. Looks like a church. So I pull in, and it's got this big solid rock on it. And we comment, oh, that's pretty neat. Solid rock, and they got the rock there. Hey, that's clever. I like that. So we turn around. We turn around, and we go back. We find the bank. How did we miss that bank? We went right by it. So anyway, we're deciding then, after the light went on, I said, hey, what was the name of that church? It was, it had a rock. It was a rock. Oh, it was Solid Rock. Let's look up Solid Rock. So we look it up online, look at everything that the church stood for, looked at the website, and hey, there was a message from the pastor. Let's see what this guy's got to say. So we listened to his message. It was great. Right to the point, good Bible teaching, good mannerisms, the whole bit. I said, hey, we got to go there next week. So we came here. And I'll tell you, as soon as you walked in the door, the warmth of the people, the greeting you, I mean, it was genuine. They were genuinely glad to see us. One of the other churches, we went to a fellowship time after church. Not one person came to talk to us. But anyway, so we stayed for the service, the worship time. Singing was great. The message was great. We got a tour of the facilities from the pastor and his family. And here we are. Narda's going to take over with some other stuff here.
Well, when we came, and obviously what Steve said, we were welcomed very wonderfully, and we met Kenny and Teresa, and immediately were invited to their small group. And so, and it was small. It was just them and us and Jane and Gary and Devo and Aaron, and of course Chloe came along. And just the warmth that we felt there, and the camaraderie, and it's just really, they were just really special. We just fell in love with them right away, and we've been close ever since. And so that lasted a while, and then things changed in the church, and we went into another small group. This time it was with John Grooms. Need I say more? But, the Grooms, the Bookers, Maynard, it was just really wonderful. And we've been really, really fussy about our churches. We've been only to two really for a long time, one for 18 years, and that one we actually got to help build, and they grew from a real small congregation like you had to a church like this. But it's just been really special. And another thing that we really, well, the first thing, of course, was they had us preach from the Word. They also had to really believe in missions. And that's something that really impressed me about all of you. The way you reach out to your, not just Nicaragua, but your immediate community is overwhelming. I mean, we've been in great churches, and they've done that too. But you go exceedingly past what I would ever expect. And it really shows that you have God's heart. And I just want to say, too, Goldie is such a special person. As much as we love Pastor Kenny, and everyone talks about Goldie and her food, which is outstanding, but I love Goldie's heart. She really reaches out to people and prays for them. And then last year,
We all have really bad days, and I'm on Facebook a lot, probably too much. But you know how you can post something on there for those who are on, and you might get 1 or 2 likes or a heart, but there's a lot of people out there reading what you have to say. So if I put something, if I put something that might be a little off, I can really get in trouble for it. But I was having a really bad day last November, and I wrote out to the church that I was, and I just felt like, of course, we need prayer, but sometimes we're afraid to say that. And then I really realized it was Satan that was saying, don't reach out to anyone. And by the end of the day, I was really distraught, and I put up that I needed prayer and said that I was really struggling, and didn't even specify what it was. But within 2 hours, 43 people had actually commented and put literal prayers on there. And I don't even remember what it was specifically about, but I know that God answered through all of you, because it was so overwhelming to me. Within 2 hours, there's 43 people praying for me from this small of a congregation. And it really meant a lot. And you are all very special. We love you all, and we know that God has guided you. And we're very, very grateful to be here. Thanks.
We left out Jenny and Randy are in the group too. So it's kind of like almost a senior group, because a lot of people aren't working anymore.
All right, let's see. Time's moving on, but hey, you got time for one more story? Since you're all staying for lunch, right? It's all about Goldie's food. You all know that. It's got nothing to do with me. Goldie made pork chops for lunch. You got to stay for lunch. Believe me, you won't want to miss that. But a few weeks ago, I spoke about this verse in Romans 8:28. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. Have you ever had something happen and you wonder, what's the good in this? How is this going to come out for good? I want to share a story that I've never shared publicly before. There's a few that I've shared this story with, but very few. It's a very personal story to me. For this, I have to go all the way back to 1964. Now, in 1964, I was a 5-year-old kid, all right? Our family lived on Market Street, just out of town, about a half a mile. And my dad farmed. He was on a rented property there. He farmed that farm, and he also worked at the Sullivan Sale Barn. There was a sale barn here in town at that time, so every week on that day, he would go to the sale barn and he would help with the sheep and the pigs and the cows and so forth. Well, there was another fella that at that time had a farm south of Sullivan. And about that time, I'm not sure exactly the year, but the Corps of Engineers came in and said, we're going to buy your land, and because we're going to make Lake Shelbyville here. And so his name was Oral Bundy. And they bought his land. He had a dairy farm south of Sullivan. And so he wanted to reinvest his money into farmland up here, this good black farmland around Sullivan. And so he came to my dad and said, I want you to farm my land. Oral Bundy by that time was an older gentleman. He was retired. And so he came to Dad and said, I want you to farm my land. Now, some of that land is right next to where the church sits here. He bought 440 acres up here around Sullivan. And I don't know if this church property was already sold to the Church of God at that point, or if he sold it to the Church of God, but this property was originally part of that farm. And this building was built in 1968, I believe. In fact, I've got an article that was in the paper at that point. It was like the building in Sullivan. It cost $200,000 to build it, and it was like the building in Sullivan. So anyway, back to the story. So Oral and his wife were getting older. They had one daughter. Her name was June. June married a fella who was in the military, and so they traveled all over. And when they retired, they settled in Long Beach, California. Now, so we farmed that land for years. As I grew up and took over the farm, I farmed it. Along with my brother, we farmed it for many years. As she got older, her husband passed away. She didn't have any children. So she came to my dad and said, you know, when I pass away, I want to give that land to some churches. And so she said, I want to give it to your church. And by that time, we had moved from my dad's church. We're going to another church in Arthur, and she knew that. And so part of that land, she said, I want to give 80 acres to Kenny's church. So great, that's awesome. And so as we started this church, when I would go to Saddleback in California for pastors' conferences, I would go visit her. She lived close by there in Long Beach, just a few blocks from the beach, and I'd go visit her. We'd go out to dinner, and she told me, she said, I'm going to change my will, and I'm going to give that 80 acres to your church, to Solid Rock. I'm like, oh, wait, wow, that's great, you know, we're blessed. Well, as it turned out, she got sick suddenly, and she went in the hospital, and within 30 days, she passed away. Well, when the will came out, it was discovered that she never got the will changed, and the 80 acres went to the church that we had previously gone to. So what do we do? What do we do, right? You know, for a while I thought, you know, I hope that church would do the right thing, because there wasn't one person in that church who knew who June Altman was, okay? That they would give that to us. I'll have to admit, for a while I was angry. I was bitter. I was resentful because they decided to keep the land. There wasn't anything legally we could do to bring that land to here. But you know what? I'm not anymore. I'm thankful. I'm thankful. Think about this. Think about what could have happened if we had gotten that land. Think about what God may have spared us from. I've seen this happen, and you have too, how people squabble over things like that. The debate would have been, should we mortgage the property and add on to our building long before we really needed it? Or should we, you know, what should we do with the money that comes off of that every year? Or should we sell it and use that to build onto the building? Think about all the things that God has spared us from because of that. All things work together for good to those who love God, who are called according to his purpose. God has blessed us amazingly, financially anyway. You know, SRC has thrived in an era where many churches are not thriving. I put out this post on Facebook yesterday. Many of you may have seen it, and I appreciate those of you that commented on it, all great comments. But I posted this on our church family page on Facebook, just asking the question, could you help me out today as I prepare for our 15th anniversary celebration tomorrow? From your perspective, why is SRC thriving and growing at a time when many churches are struggling and dying? And I asked you to comment. Many of you did comment, and I appreciate that. But I have to ask myself, why? See, I don't think it's because of my preaching. You can go to TV, you can go to YouTube. There's a lot of preachers that are way better than I am. It's not because of our great praise band. Wait, we don't have a band. But we do have great praise, don't we? We do have great praise. We appreciate our praise team. They do an awesome job. It's not because we have the best building in town. You should have been here when we had buckets sitting around when it would rain, you know. We've come a long way. As I thought about this, there's two things I think that really, really stand out. And I think the one thing really is the main thing that leads to the other thing. I think the one thing is our focus on Jesus. That word, that name above every name. We have to stay with our focus on Jesus. You know, we can get sidetracked so easily and get caught up in the little stuff. But our focus has to be on Jesus. Hebrews tells us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. The second thing is, I think, is collectively, and you heard it from every testimony here this morning. You heard it from every testimony. Everyone's willingness to be real and to help each other. To help each other. Just in the last week, I've had several different occasions where people have called me or texted me or something asking about how I can help. How I can help with a certain situation. How I can help with this, or that person I hear is going through something. How can I help that? And I think that's the key. Many of you expressed this morning that SRC feels like family. Feels like family. And I think that's the key for us here. You know, Galatians 6 says, let us not become weary in doing good. For at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people. But it goes on, it doesn't stop there. He says, especially to those who belong to the family of believers. And you all practice that, as we heard in the testimonies this morning. And there could be a lot more testimonies if we had time like that. I'm thankful to God for that. And as I said earlier, SRC is successful in spite of us, not because of us. In fact, just before I came up here this morning, I had a guy tell me, he said, now, don't embarrass us when you get up there this morning. I'm glad we have a church family that we can talk to each other like that. I won't mention John's name, but, oh, wait. But I'm thankful that we have that here. And let's not become weary in doing good. What's the next 15 years going to look like? After starting from our first church service of 22 people to what we have today, can you imagine where we'll be in 15 years from now? I have no idea, but God does, and we're just going to follow God's leading like we have in the past. We're just going to keep doing what we're doing, and God's going to take us there, all right? I want to invite you all to stay for lunch. Like I said, you're going to experience some of Goldie's cooking today, and some others as well, but even if you didn't think you were going to stay for lunch, please stay and join our fellowship time together. And then also, as you do that, you will see why we need to add on to the church, okay? You will see why it's kind of uncomfortable having a fellowship lunch here anymore, but it's great. So I'm going to pray. The worship team is going to come sing another song. In fact, I think the kids are doing the last song. And then give them a few minutes to get everything ready. And we're going to go out through the library over here as we go over and partake of lunch. So let's pray. Father, we just come to you. We thank you for your faithfulness to us. We thank you as we celebrate today what you've done in the last 15 years. Our hearts are so full and so grateful. And God, I just ask for your guidance and leading in the next 15 years. Help us to stay humble and to stay in your will, and that you would just guide us, that we'd be willing to let you guide us where you want us to go in the future. Thank and praise you for this day and for each one that's here. We pray this in Jesus' name.